reflecting back as a planner, quite often we would get visitors come from other parts of the country and to the planning office. And they always wanted to see Baltimore City and see the Inner Harbor and those kind of things. So we'd give them the tour and show them around. And the next thing, if I was driving, I would try to get on the Jones Falls and keep people talking about the city. And of course, 10, 15 minutes, you're on Green Spring Valley Road. And all of a sudden, they'll stop and say, "Where are we?" And they are just amazed at what they could see this close to Baltimore City. There are not a lot of places around this country where you have that kind of an advantage, and it can be enjoyed by everybody. And I think that's extremely special.
Having this experience that exists out here, it is otherworldly. It's like a place that I don't think exists other places. When I describe Sagamore Farm, which is a part of the Worthington Valley, you know, I put it up against Napa Valley, I put it up against Carlsbad, California, the prettiest places on earth. And when I go to Colorado or any place else, I'm constantly comparing and constantly saying, this is nothing like my Sagamore Farm in our home.
Yeah, I was born on Mantua Farm. It's been my home since 1936. My father bought the property, and what's now Mantua Farm is exactly what he bought, and the family have owned ever since. What's important to me is that members of my family, my children and grandchildren, take an interest in the farm and carry on the tradition.
We're stewards of this place. It really is up to us to preserve it and try and keep it as nicely as we can, and to treasure it, to really do what you need to do to see that we don't lose it.
The valley is it's an extraordinary place, first and foremost. And like any place, it's not defined by the trees or the rivers or the streams, although I know that that's what is said in the word preservation, but it's always defined by the people. When you see the community and the way that this group comes together, it makes me very proud to be a part of a group of people that are this special, and more importantly, that care that much about each other. And as you can tell, they care that much about the land.
You know, the Valley's Planning Council, of course, it isn't one valley, it's a large area. And what's amazing is you've had a group of citizens that have been fighting to preserve that and keep that like it is. The culture over 50 years is, we've got something unique and we want to keep it like this.
Well, you've asked me about the genesis of the Valley's Planning Council. It was the foresight of an architect. His name was Grinnell W. Locke. And he had an architectural practice here, and he was very far-sighted. He lived in the Green Spring and Worthington Valley area and appreciated it, and he thought something should be done.
Back in the 1960s, the residents of the valleys, who had a tradition of attachment and affinity of caring for the land, felt there was a threat coming from sprawl development moving out from Baltimore City. And I think what crystallized that was the plans for the Baltimore Beltway. The thought was that there would be a lot of population that followed the road and the exits off the Beltway.
There was this land planner called Ian McHarg who had this vision for the valleys. And the vision was to keep the valleys open and to put higher densities on the ridges. And we thought that was a great idea, so that the community backed it and formed Valley Planning Council 50 years ago.
This clearly was a situation in which private property owners had got together and recognized the legacy that had been handed on to them for farming and for living, and that it was something that should be protected against uncontrolled growth of subdivisions and industrial parks and the like.
A population of, I think, 15,000 could reasonably be expected to go to about 80,000 by 1980 and to 110 or 120,000 by the year 2000. And so we had some idea of the dimensions of the problem. The zoning controls exist at the moment in the 70 square miles. 1 house per acre generally would have been built throughout, and it would have simply inexorably spread its way over the plateau, into the valleys, up the wooded slopes, expunging all of this testimony to 2 centuries of good husbandry, to wise land management, expunged it all and simply replaced it with a ticky-tacky of hot dog stands and gas stations and diners and billboards and sagging wire and split levels and ranchers, a testimony to greed, stupidity, and an inordinate capacity to destroy, and the total atrophy of any creative skills. And this, of course, was their inevitable destiny. Why should they be spared? The rest of Baltimore County has succumbed, just as the rest of the country has, to the horrors of typical suburban development, the same dreadful cycle which begins when farmers find it more profitable to sell land and crops.
Ian McHarg was an amazing man. I found him just a gigantic figure. He was a Scotchman, and anytime he would come to the Valley or come to my office, it was a real treat.
The question was, there's got to be 110,000 people accommodated in this area of 70 square miles. How do you best develop it? We studied bedrock geology and groundwater resources and physiography, the various streams, the floodplains, and we came to some general conclusions about the degree to which the land, in fact, could absorb growth, welcome growth. We found that the valleys were coterminous with the most important groundwater resource in the whole Baltimore region. So we could say as a proposition, unless you want to make dysentery, diarrhea, hepatitis, and cholera a way of life, unless you would like to make your metaphysical symbol toilet paper, then don't develop in the valleys, because clearly this is an inordinate hazard to health. This is a major resource of groundwater for the entire community.
It was not that easy in the very beginning when we were trying to sell this plan to prospective members. There were some very prominent attorneys who represented people in the area, one of whom who contended this was a communist plot to take over people's land and to ruin the value. In actual fact, as Wallace and McHarg indicated, this probably will increase the value of the land, if you're talking about that, because people like the idea, if they were to buy a piece of property, that the adjoining properties were under some sort of environmental and open space easement, and that apparently has been proven to be correct.
And as it turned out, they had all the ingredients to make a successful plan. And I don't think those planets are in alignment very often, but you had concerned residents who cared about the land, you had good people in the county agencies, you had the right county councilman, and you had the right consultant. The team of McHarg, Wallace, and Roberts was unparalleled, and all of those came together at once, and they came up with a remarkable plan.
The plan for the valleys has very much shown that it is possible to encourage redevelopment and new development in established neighborhoods while also preserving regionally important natural amenities.
The plan for the valleys was somewhat unique in that fact that it was driven by the private side as opposed to the public side. But the concept was frankly historic. was one of the very first that looked at a rural area and say, what do we want it to look like in 25, 50, 100 years?
One thing that I think is unique about the plan, number one, it came together very well because of all the cooperation among the different players, but it was actually implemented. There's so many plans that people fight, or they sit on the shelf, or nobody bothers to, follow through on them, administrations change, whatever. But the plan for the valleys actually endured.
The Valley's Planning Council plan never said there should be no more people moving into the valley. It always said that there was a way to accommodate development as well as to preserve the land resources.
I believe that the plan for the valleys became the hallmark that showed other communities what is possible. David Wallace and Ian McHarg and Bill Roberts, we learned how to do environmental planning through the Green Spring Valley Plan.
The main things that came out of the plan for the valleys that were in the plan and that were implemented were the restriction of water and sewer service, the creation of resource conservation zones, and the pursuit of private conservation easements. And those three things have really laid the foundation for the success in growth management in Baltimore County.
Well, there's a common theory that the things that drive development are water, sewer, and roads. And once that's in, it's very hard to control how far out it goes.
People began to realize that to allow public utilities, sewer and water, to enter into the valleys would be a Trojan horse, if you will.
A key tool that Baltimore County has is the urban-rural demarcation line. And it's the line that limits public water and sewer service. And in Baltimore County, that line, the URDL, restricts public water and sewer to 1/3 of the county. And inside the URDL, on that 1/3 of the land, 90% of the population resides. And outside the URDL, on 2/3 of the land, is reserved for resource conservation zoning. That is a huge success in the area of smart growth.
We know in the Green Spring Valley that it is underlain by an enormous aquifer, which provides direct feed of underground water to the reservoirs that supply potable water to a considerable number of citizens in Baltimore County and in the city of Baltimore. And were that all to be overlain with densities of 10 and 20 to the acre with roads and parking lots and industrial and commercial sites, there is no question there'd been enormous expense required to clean that water and purify it before it could enter into the potable water system.
There are streams, there are trout, everything which really makes life more livable. So it was not just a bunch of people who wanted to have beautiful views every morning. There was a considerable benefit. There were far and beyond open space and so on.
The connection between land and clean water in a system like Chesapeake Bay is absolutely integral. You have to protect the land. You have to manage the land well for the benefit of clean water downstream. And it's taken all of us in society a long time to first learn that lesson and then put it into practice.
And it's important to understand that prior to the resource conservation zones going into effect, the entire North County could be developed on 1 acre lots. The entire North County, regardless of where it was. All the farmland, all the watershed lands, everything was zoned for 1 acre lots. So the attempt in 1975-76 to develop the resource conservation zones was a real challenge.
The plan for the valleys did contemplate permanent protection of private land. They had sort of a complicated arrangement for it in the plan, but what really turned out to be the way that it happened in Baltimore County was through land trusts.
Back in the 70s, the tax laws were changed in which development rights could be gifted to a receiving organization in Maryland, set up the Maryland Environmental Trust. And as a result, landowners slowly but surely have been donating their lands to the Maryland Environmental Trust.
An easement is when you sell a portion of your rights on your land. You give up the right to develop your land, and you're either paid for it or you make a donation, in which case you get a tax break over a number of years.
Valleys planning has kept the kind of speculative zoning from happening that has happened in other areas. So you don't have people buying up large chunks of land to hold on to speculatively and being sure that in another 10, 15, 20 years they're going to be able to turn it over and sell it for a tremendous amount of money.
Well, a lot of people might think that because we have such restrictive zoning, the resource conservation zoning in the area outside the URDL, that we don't need easements. But we don't feel that way because, for one thing, you can still build in the resource conservation zone. There are a lot of small lots. So easements are important. They protect the land permanently, whereas zoning is temporary. And right now, we're very lucky with our resource conservation zoning, but you never know who might come into office and what kind of changes could be made.
This is multiple property owners. This is hundreds of property owners who have made the decision to voluntarily protect their land in perpetuity. And again, it's a culture of preservation that the people are just willing to do this.
We have, over the years, put different easements through different organizations on various parcels. With this 40 acres in the main house here, we just put on under easement. I think we got it done year before last with Baltimore County. So the 110 acres of our farm that goes from this fence line north is under easement. It's all protected. All right, Pop, so you need to tell me who goes into what pile here. The lamb operation is actually my father's. I help him out a little bit, but he does 90% of it.
We've been in this business since 1951, which is 60 years. We've enjoyed it up till now, and that's what makes it worth living out here. And it's good exercise, and that keeps me going. Come on. I just cleaned a little of the afterbirth off. You see the little tail? When the little tail waggles like that, that's 3 shakes of a lamb's tail. And that means that they're on the spigot. And look at that tail go.
We train horses. I'm very focused on saving off-the-track thoroughbreds, so we make a lot of fox hunters. We breed a few, we break people's yearlings, we educate young horses. We'll sort of do anything to make a living. And we decided to get into Devon cattle. They're a heritage breed, they're original grass-fed beef, so my son has decided that he wants to come home and take over the farm, which would be a 3rd generation, which really surprises me. The horse industry, the public of the state of Maryland have no idea what a large economic impact it has and would never believe. It's 3 times greater than all the college and professional sports in the state. Maryland happens to have more horses per square mile than any other state in the nation. About 15 people I wrote checks for this week, and between the feed, the blacksmiths, Napa and Hereford, the mill, repair, Finch Services, oil. I think the horse industry, I don't think anybody has any realization of the economic impact